Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Last Saturday, U.S.-based think tank 38 North said a high level of activity has been detected at North Korea's Yongbyon nuclear complex, suggesting the regime could be preparing for a possible nuclear test. Though no clear indication of a test has been detected yet, experts say it would not be surprising to see the seventh one come soon. Meanwhile, on the human rights front, South Korea is more actively participating in denouncing the regime's human rights violations. Seoul recently released a 450-page report on the issue, and just yesterday supported the United Nations Human Rights Council in adopting a resolution by co-sponsoring it for the first time in 5 years. For an in-depth analysis, we welcome into the studio Doctor Go Myong-hyun, Senior Fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, welcome.
Yes.
And we also have Dr. Patrick Cronin, Asia Pacific Security Chair at Hudson Institute, on the line. Dr. Cronin, it's good to see you again.
Good to be here. Thank you.
All right. First question to our Dr. Go. Washington-based 38 North said the recent satellite images of the Yongbyon nuclear complex showed a high level of activity. What is this about?
Well, so the Yongbyon reactor essentially is a reactor that's dedicated to producing the nuclear materials to be processed into plutonium, which ends up ends up being part of the nuclear weapons in North Korea. So the nuclear reactor in Yongbyon is a 5-megawatt system that produces around 5 to 8 kilograms of plutonium per year. So what the 38 North has observed is that the reactor has been essentially showing activities in the form of a discharging of the cooling water. So it means that the Yongbyon reactor has restarted again. But this is not an unprecedented move by North Korea. North Korea has done this last year, most recently. So this is what North Korea does time to time in order to replenish their plutonium stock, in our belief. So, this is nothing new in a sense that North Korea has done that before. But it also shows that North Korea is very consistent in its behavior of mass producing their nuclear weapons.
Right, so it could be a part of an effort to replenish
Yes.
Right. Interesting. Now, Dr. Cronin, given the activity, though, watchers are still noting that it could be related to ongoing preparation for a possible nuclear test. And though the Pentagon on Monday said it could not see a clear indication of a test just yet, if number 7 takes place, what message would North Korea be delivering?
Well, whether it's a nuclear test or a satellite launch or more missile launches, the message is always the same out of North Korea, which is to take the Kim Jong-un administration very seriously. That's their message. And they want to brandish nuclear weapons, obviously, so they can deter any attack on the regime. But they also increasingly want to use those nuclear weapons capabilities for coercion to essentially get their way, whether it's with regard to negotiations or to get South Korea, the United States, to back down, for instance, from military drills.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Cronin, if the 7th nuclear test does take place, I wonder how this is going to affect international politics. I mean, how is China and Russia going to respond to North Korea's such move?
Well, the major powers right now are highly divided, as you know. So it's unlikely that Moscow and Beijing are going to quickly work with Washington and London and Paris to try to go to the United Nations Security Council and ensure that there are harsh sanctions imposed on North Korea. Instead, there's likely to be more enabling of North Korea's nuclear weapons by Russia and China. That's the reality. They're still going to give lip service to the lack of support for proliferation of nuclear weapons, but in reality, they are going to be allowing North Korea to continue to build up its nuclear weapons program. Unfortunately, that's where we are today with international relations.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Go, let's move on to the joint military exercise. South Korea, the United States, and Japan held a trilateral naval exercise involving American aircraft carrier earlier this week. It lasted for 2 days and included anti-submarine and search and rescue drills. What significance did these joint maneuvers have?
So yeah, it represents the multidimensionality of the joint military drills. We have seen that the two countries, South Korea and the United States, have carried out joint air exercises. They also carried out the joint land-ground exercises, and they also carried out an amphibious landing exercise. So now they are carrying out a naval exercise. And the significance here is that the Japanese are working closely with the South Korean forces in the anti-submarine warfare exercises. And this is where, like any joint military drills and any components in joint military drills, it's meant to have two meanings. One is clearly to increase the military readiness, but at the same time, this kind of activity sends a message to North Korea. So, for instance, North Korea has been very focused in completing their development of ballistic missile-capable submarines. So these exercises, which actually focused on developing and increasing the readiness of the anti-submarine warfare, shows to North Korea that even if North Korea achieves high level of development with their ballistic missile submarines, that the countries here and the allies of the United States, South Korea and Japan, are ready to tackle the challenge. So this is essentially shows that the three countries, the South Korea and the United States, are working together in the land and air component, but in the naval part, the Japanese are essentially lending a hand too.
Right, I see. Now, Dr. Cronin, meanwhile, North Korea strongly criticized joint drills while warning that Washington and Seoul should never forget that a rival state has a nuclear attack capability. Does the regime seem to be using its nuke capabilities as a threat more often recently?
Well, it's hard to say they're more often, but they are often threatening their nuclear saber rattling. I think credible combat power that is required for the maintenance of peace and deterrence is what South Korea, the United States, and also Japan are trying to show North Korea, that they cannot actually use these nuclear weapons in harm's way. And in fact, North Korea seems to know this. So they are brandishing their nuclear weapons, the threats of nuclear weapons, in order to frighten people, both at home in North Korea, to ensure the strength of the regime at home, but also to frighten South Koreans and Japanese and Americans, thinking that if they're going to bother to build their own self-defense capabilities, somehow this is going to lead to conflict. The opposite is true. It would be weakness that would lead to conflict, and it's the combat credible capabilities that are exercising right now on the peninsula that maintain the peace and deterrence, and North Korea knows that.
Right. Now, Dr. Go, shifting gears a little bit here. In April, major political events are scheduled in Pyongyang, including the 11th anniversary of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's inauguration on April 11th. Could you tell us more about the major political events Pyongyang is expecting in April? And given that Pyongyang usually times its provocations with political events to show off its arsenal, what kind of provocations should we expect?
Well, as you pointed out that April is full of political events for North Korea. For instance, in addition to the anniversary of Kim Jong-un's accession to power on April 11th, there's also the Day of the Sun, the day of the birth of the North Korea's founder, Kim Il-sung. That falls on April 15th. And there's also April 25th, which marks the anniversary of the establishment of the North Korea's Revolutionary Forces or Revolutionary Army, which is, essentially, this is not the this is a predecessor to the Korean People's Army. In the sense that it used to be a different anniversary for North Korea, that this particular anniversary celebrates the establishment of guerrilla forces that was founded by Kim Il-sung back in 1920s. This wasn't the major anniversary for North Korea, but then they shifted the anniversary to earlier to February 2030, if my memory serves right. But nonetheless, North Korea uses this occasion to mount parades and then showcase their new weapon systems. So I think the North Koreans have a lot of options for April. They can use April 11th, they can use the April 15th, as well as on April 25th. But then at the same time, the challenge for North Korea is they have revealed so many new weapon systems, for instance, in the last February. So they might be running out of a new system to reveal. So chances that North Korea might have a more muted parade, meaning instead of focusing so much on the weapon systems, they might try to send a political message. So more a political parade rather than a military parade could be awaiting us. So in that sense, that there will be no new essentially pieces of information that we can gather from the parade. But on the other hand, I think North Korea also has been taking actions, hinting at the next cycle of provocations. For instance, we know that North Korea revealed their new tactical nuclear weapons warheads called Hwasong 31.
Yeah.
So what North Korea does in terms of provocation is that before testing their new weapon system, they demonstrate the existence of these weapon systems first. So the concern is that North Korea having revealed the existence of a new tactical nuclear warheads, they might be preparing for the nuclear test, the seventh nuclear test. We have seen that with the most recent ICBM model, Hwasong 17. So North Korea could take the same course of action with their tactical nuclear warheads. So instead of a parade, we might be seeing, it's not going to coincide with any of these anniversaries, I believe, but then we might be seeing, we might be essentially find out that North Korea is preparing for a nuclear test in the near future.
Right. Now, moving on to the human rights front, Dr. Cronin. South Korea, for the first time recently, made public the details of North Korea's dire human rights violations in the 450-page report. Now, could you briefly describe some of the vivid testimony from more than 500 North Korean defectors who came to the South from 2017 to 2022?
Well, the first thing that strikes me is that there are 1,600 cases reviewed in this report. So it's the overall pattern of human rights abuse that's standing out right now in North Korea. But obviously there are some really dramatic, awful cases when you think about a pregnant woman simply for disagreeing with the Kim regime is executed, or the public execution of teenagers for watching videos that come from South Korea, bought through China, or smoking opium. When you think about people with disabilities, essentially, being forced to have hysterectomies, it's just a stunning pattern of human rights behavior. And the other aspect of this report is that all of these cases are about incidents since 2017. So this is happening now. It's not the distant past. All of these things are happened since the American college student Otto Warmbier was killed at the hands of the North Korean regime for doing nothing, really, for tearing down a poster. It's just an appalling human rights record, and we have to remember it. We should not bury it and sweep it under the rug. And this report helps us put it right in the front frame so that we do remember what we're dealing with here.
Right. It's just so unfortunate how North Koreans' human rights are being suppressed like this. Now, Dr. Go, revealing such explicit details of Pyongyang's dire human rights situation is quite a rare move, and this is actually for the first time Seoul's government is doing so. What's behind such disclosure of the report, and what significance does this report have?
Well, so clearly we haven't heard these kind of revelations from at the official level made by the South Korean government before, but then the NGOs and non-government organizations, as well as the international organizations such as the United Nations, the Commission of Inquiry on North Korean human rights issues, issued a report 10 years ago, and the depiction of the human rights violations taking place in North Korea was very graphic as well. So what South Korean government is doing essentially is keeping up with the international community when it comes to revealing these kind of details, and also creating the international opinion to pressure North Korea to improve the human rights records in their own country. But then I think these details, this goes beyond just calling attention to this very pressing issue, is to essentially add flesh to the accusation that the international community has made against the North Korean regime, that the human rights violations taking place in the country is very grave. And so the gravity of the situation is actually revealed through these kind of testimonies. So there's that issue, and also the sheer amount of testimonies that's been offered, included in the report, shows that the human rights violations perpetuated by the North Korean regime is systematic and widespread. And these are the three exact keywords that the COI, the Commission of Inquiry into North Korean human rights situation, describe the widespread nature and the grave nature of the North Korean regime's human rights violations. So I think in a way, personally, I think the Korean government is trying to make up for the lost time that the government has taken active action against this issue. And I think in a way they're catching up with the expectation that the international community has, not just for the North Korean regime, but for South Korean government to do more and to bring more focus into this very pressing issue.
Right, it's taking more action right now. Dr. Go, one more question. Meanwhile, while saying his administration will fully expose North Korea's human rights violations to the international community, President Yoon Suk-yeol actually stressed the importance of full and practical implementation of the North Korean Human Rights Act, which was enacted in 2016. What is this act and why has it been inactive up until now? And if it does get activated, what significance would that have?
Well, the act is essentially to legislate at the official level an institutionalization of investigation and protection of the North Korean human rights. So we have to remember that this is a South Korean law trying to protect the human rights of the North Korean people.
Right.
So there's a clear limitation there. So the way the South Korean government tried to instrumentalize these efforts has been at the core of it lies the establishment of the North Korean Human Rights Foundation, as well as the center to keep records of this kind of the testimonies of the coming from North Korean defectors revealing the systematic violation of human rights in North Korea. So these are two core elements of this law. But then the challenge has been that the previous South Korean administration was more focused on engaging the regime, so tried to deflect these issues away from these issues so that they could essentially maintain good relationship with the regime in Pyongyang. So that's the reason why I think the Korean government has been able to put this law into practical effect. So what Yoon Suk-yeol administration is doing is basically going back to the spirit of the law and then put into action these instruments such as the foundation as well as the center to record the testimonies from defectors. So I think in that sense, I think we are going, this is a law that was passed 5 years ago. So we're trying to catch up here as well.
Right, so it could have some limitations, like you said, because it is a South Korean law. I do hope it could be practically implemented. Now, Dr. Cronin, the UN Human Rights Council on Tuesday adopted a resolution co-sponsored by South Korea that condemns North Korea's human rights violations. And this was apparently the first time in 5 years South Korea participated in such a resolution. What has been newly included in the resolution, and what significance does South Korea being back as a co-sponsor position have?
Well, the resolution is largely built on the idea of naming and shaming, just like the report that came out of South Korea looking at the 1,600 cases of human rights violations. And so when it calls for North Korea to acknowledge its human rights abuses and to desist, obviously that has no impact in and of itself. But, and this is what's new in this resolution, it's empowering the Office of the High Commissioner to enact recommendations from the Commission of Inquiry. So it's actually taking experts' advice and saying we can enact these recommendations and we can hold the regime accountable for its human rights abuses. And also for building the transparency, it's extending the life, the tenure of the Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in North Korea. So it's building accountability and the machinery of the United Nations human rights machinery to hold North Korea accountable. Now, why this is important for South Korea to be signed onto this is that it's like civil society and our civic duty to hold governments accountable, to make sure that we have good government, and if it's not, that we call it out. Internationally, that means major states like South Korea have to stand up and be heard because they're not going to be heard in North Korea. There's no voice there. So it's very important for South Korea to be signed onto this resolution and to be a full active participant internationally in upholding good governance, including on the Korean Peninsula.
Right, I cannot agree more, and I do hope all North Koreans' human rights could be eventually properly be protected. Now, I'd like to ask more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. But thank you, Dr. Go, and of course, thank you, Dr. Cronin, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, this is all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.